Hello, welcome everybody today to our Parents and Carers Network Teenager Talks. This week, our topic is social media, teens, influencers or influenced. Huge welcome to my incredible speakers. I'm so lucky, don't understand. We have got Carter-Fulton from the Student Mindset Academy. We've got Helen Bendon and Ben Serlin, our very own Middlesex people. Yay! And I'm going to introduce them right now. So Joanne, who is Carter-Fulton, has been in education for 30 years as a teacher, tutor, deputy head teacher, and as part of an advisory team for a local authority. Jo has taught right across the age range from early years upwards, is a master in Neuro-Linguistic Programming, coach and master timeline therapist. Jo believes that all students are capable of a successful outcome if they have the right tools to support them. Jo creates a safe space for teens to support, raise confidence, and create a community that focuses on mental health, emotional well-being, and learning to help teens reach their potential. What I'll do is I will introduce Helen and Ben when it's their section to speak, but if that's okay, I will pass over to Jo now. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Hope everybody is well. Just let me know that everybody can see that. I hope you can. Social media, teens, influence or influence. And I chose this title to start with because I thought, I'm thinking about my own children who are just past teens now, or young adults, and my youngest who is also a teen, and how from conversations that I've had with them and with the teens that I work with, how they feel influenced by others, but also their role in influencing others. And I think that's, you're seeing two sides of it there is really important. So I work with a lot of teens, an awful lot of teens, whether it's in a school environment, alternate provision environment, or whether it is with private clients. And obviously I've got teens myself. And when I asked them, these are things that they sort of came up with actually. I did ask them, how they feel about social media and its role at the moment. The first thing is that it was part of everyday life. It is just what they do. They can be completely linked to their phone. And when I said that to my children, the first thing they said is, "But Mum, you always have your phone as well." Because I mean, it's like it's a mini computer, isn't it? Now we would feel lost without it because it has so much stuff on it. The positives were that it was a way of communicating and keeping in touch with what is going on. And how they feel that they need to be a part of that, and that there's a feeling of keeping up with everybody else. And my son actually said the next one, he said it's easy content. It's easy content that's accessible and requires only a short attention span. And certainly in education, we are seeing children with a much shorter attention span. I'll be interested to hear what Helen and Ben think of that in a moment. But a lot shorter attention span in terms of lesson length. And
Jo, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Do you have slides, or is it speaking directly? Just checking.
Slides on? Are they not on?
No.
Oh,
so sorry.
It was I can hear you. Bear with me, everybody. I'm sorry.
Apologies.
I did press it. Why has it not come on? Let me just try again. I'm so sorry, everybody.
No, absolutely fine.
No, I'm glad you just said earlier. Oh my goodness.
Right, lovely.
Let's try it again.
I see them. Thank you.
Can we see that? Let me just go back. Can everybody see that one? Is that okay?
Yes, 100%. Sorry, thanks.
No, I'm glad you said it. I feel really bad now. Let me just go back. So yes, the third one down is easy content. This is what my son said to me. He said it's easy content, it's easily accessible, it's only a short attention span. It raised the question, and certainly in the alternate provision that I'm working in, we talked about length of sessions, and if people aren't able to cope for that length of time now, what are we going to do about that, and whether there's a role that pandemic played in that as well, but that's a different matter. But social media is popular for a variety of reasons. These are ones that teens that I work with came up with. They said they can get lots of pictures, images from friends and other people. And I asked them where they got that from, as you can see there. Also, my older teens and young adults said that it was really good for networking, for job opportunities. That could be either locally on local sites, or obviously for us, we might use LinkedIn and things like that. for finding relationships, which I thought was an interesting one that come up. And then for a lot of the teens, they said it was knowing that their parents or their parents with a current partner had used some of the apps in order to, and use social media in order to help them find the partner that they're with, which I thought was a really interesting comment. For using videos, obviously, on YouTube, and there are obviously lots of others as well, but that's what gets used. But also for sharing opinions and getting ideas, and I thought that was an interesting one, because Facebook I thought was more for updates, but they said they felt that they could get opinion sharing more on that. So why do teens use it? Well, obviously they want to fit in. They don't want to stand out or be different. And it's like it's like being in with the group or in with the clique at the time. They don't want to be out of the loop. And this was an interesting one. Some of the teens that I spoke to said they didn't want to be made fun of. So when I asked a bit more about why they didn't want to be made fun of, it was the idea that if they didn't know, if they had missed out on something, they may not be up with the recent trend, and therefore they might feel that they, turn up in something that wasn't necessarily the thing to wear, and they may be made fun of in that way, which led me then to have discussions about self-esteem and their own confidence and their own belief in how they, appear themselves. They also said they see their peers and social environments, and they want to be exactly the same. And by social environments, then where people were hanging out and what people were doing. They also use it because, again, it's a feeling of safety, almost safety in numbers, but also it can be quite encouraging. They said if somebody else is doing, particularly going for a sports team, they felt that they were able to do that because somebody else was doing it. Again, it was about being led by somebody else rather than setting a trend, if you like. But also in a positive way, a couple of them said to me that they felt that they wouldn't have necessarily considered a college route if it hadn't been for their friends and what their comments and things and other people that were at college and how they were portraying that lifestyle and that experience. But also mainly, of course, about interaction, isn't it? Now, the other one I thought was really interesting was, I had a big conversation with a group of about 5 or 6 students here about gaining information in a subtle way. And that was actually their phrasing. That's not my phrasing, that's come directly from them. And I thought this was really interesting, that they felt they could find out things without necessarily asking a question directly. And, we can link puberty, hormones, all those sorts of things, life choices, maybe their family environment. They felt they could get information that way, and it could come up almost very subtly in a chat, or the conversation could go that way, and they could find out more information rather than actually putting themselves out there as asking that question directly. So in a way, they saw that as a real positive, in that they felt that at least that they could find out that information. It was a place that they could go to get that support if they needed it, to get the answers they needed. And when asked about the fact that would they do that rather than ask an adult first, there was a mixed reaction. Some definitely felt they could go to an adult, but some, of course, felt that they couldn't, and this was the best way of getting information. But this word normal came up a lot, and with the sort of with the sort of speech mark, the quotation marks, because what is normal? We had a big discussion about that. What do we mean by normal? We're all normal, but it was more about wanting to fit in, about not wanting to stand out, about wanting to be part of a group, feeling safe and feeling accepted in some way, which again then sort of flipped on its head the idea that we might say that sometimes when teens become sort of those risk takers and maybe can be more rebellious, I use that word loosely as well, but just asserting their individuality in a different way, which I thought was really an interesting one. But I think, it's it's the idea of them finding a way to communicate in some way. That is the sort of key thing that came up for them, definitely. So I was then thinking about how it affects teens. And again, I had a lot of discussion with the teens that I work with, whether it's in an alternate provision, whether it's in school, or whether it's private clients, because I really wanted to get, for this talk, a real sense of the picture and how it looks for them at the moment. Now, there was a study done that said that if you interview or ask teens separately, the answer to a question, the answer will be different to the one you get if they're all in a group. And I think we all can agree with that. And I've certainly seen that without a doubt. But I think it also depends on other people's reactions. They look a lot on the face reactions and the body language of other people. It was about seeking approval, about receiving compliments from other people. And they were definitely, or they are definitely, thinking about what is the right thing to say. And then you can see it sometimes. They'll be looking quietly and they're very quiet, or might put their head down. And they would say to me afterwards, I didn't want to say that in front of everybody else because. And I think a lot of them were saying that with social media, particularly if it's like a WhatsApp or Snapchat, sometimes, I mean, that's more visual, but if it's something like WhatsApp messages or a sort of text group, that can be difficult because they don't necessarily want to be giving their opinion because it will stay there. It's more of a permanent feature, whereas a conversation is more, it's there and then it's gone. But we know that children from about the age of 10, and I mean, definitely from 10, it's in a different way, but even young children, they seek reward in some way, whether it's stickers, whether it's a certificate, anything like that. And that develops as they go through puberty, doesn't it? Where they can start to need a bit more attention, a bit more approval. They seek approval from their peers. They get that more from peers than they do from their family. And of course, that causes a lot of pressure, and some teens can find that really difficult. Again, a face-to-face conversation is something that's dealt with in the moment it finishes, whereas something on social media is there for a long time unless somebody removes it. And that definitely gets a feeling of anxiety for a lot of teens, I think. Again, I put in here, you know, they can create that sense of safety. They feel part of the group. They feel accepted. And, you know, that can be with clothing, hair or makeup, particularly for girls, clothes, hair, and just the way the way they behave can be also important for that for the boys and girls. But again, I think social media for them, they said, gives them a lot of confidence. It can be very motivational as well if they feel part of that and feel encouraged to do something. They feel like you get a lot of information. And I think also that they did say is if they didn't feel comfortable saying something out loud, they can put it on a WhatsApp or a text. And when we did a talk about parents' communication, this was a huge thing that some children, some teens find it easier to communicate by text. They felt it was a safer place for them to do that than necessarily having a conversation out loud. But of course, there are negative effects with that. You can get some unpleasant comments. There can be parts of bullying. There can be, you know, the pressure of body image. There can be sort of feeling they need to do some riskier things. They might see some different behaviour. And I've listed some of the things there that we can see that can have a negative effect, particularly. But it all comes back to the teen brain, doesn't it? And I've used this slide before, and these are things that, just some of the many questions that are going on with teens, and this is one I use with the teens that I work with a lot, you know, and they would say, yeah, that's exactly what they feel like. Are they part of that group, or do they feel that they need to fit in? Do they feel that, so I can hear noise out back, I'm gonna have to go and sort that out in a minute. You know, am I liked? Who can I trust? You know, what do I actually want? Who am I? What's my identity? And these are all the things that they feel they can sometimes get on the social media that they can't get elsewhere. Just bear with me one moment, Christiana. I'm just going to go and sort out somebody that's come in. Just there 1 second.
No problem at all.
Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. Thanks, everyone. It's absolutely fine. No problem, Jo, please, honestly.
So how can you support your team? Well, obviously, you know, it's good for them to keep their friendship circle wide. And I think, you know, this does help, social media does help with keeping that group wide, but I think also it helps them when there are problems within a group. Having your friendship locally wide is really good. Then if there is a problem, they've still got other friends that they can talk to, they can confide with, and if they're a bit younger, they can play with as well. We have to build their self-esteem. I think this is really important. And I could talk for ages about how we can boost teen self-esteem, but that's really important. We have to encourage them to be themselves. And it can be tricky because I know they want to be assertive and assert their own identity, but they also need to fit in. But encourage them as much as you can to be themselves is really important. And I think role modeling, they know, but sometimes they feel they have to say yes. But I think if we can role model the no, but give a reason. So it could be, no, I don't want to do that because it makes me feel unwell if I do that. That can help them just have that confidence to say no when everybody else, they're feeling the pressure and everybody else is saying they want to say yes to join. Maybe it's something risky, maybe it's that drinking or something like that. Then I say, no, it actually makes me really unwell if I do that, or no, it makes me unhealthy, it makes me feel unhealthy. Encourage their development, self-care, the compassion skills. I think that's really important. And again, I think probably as parents and teachers as well, parents keeping the communication channels open, screen time versus family time, maybe limits on screen time, that could be helpful, or screen-free days. I mean, I have a link on of my children's computers where they can limit what they're doing, and not because I want to stop them doing that, but because I'm just limiting it. I'm trying to make sure that we're actually living in the real world with people, and we're keeping that family time sacred as well. And obviously it's monitoring contents and lots of things like that. Right, so my screen's now, oh, okay. So warning signs, things to look out for. So changes in mood and behaviour, for no obvious reason. Those are things we're looking out for. We might look at forms of aggression, different behaviour, changes in sleep pattern, changes in eating habits, under eating or overeating. There may be some school reluctance, and in some places school refusal as well. It might be feeling very low. It might be stopping clubs or activities that they used to enjoy, so they're feeling that peer pressure and feeling tearful. All these sorts of things are things to definitely look for. But they're not just indicative of peer pressure, of course. It can be lots of other things, but these are definitely ones to look for. And that's how to get in contact with me if you want to. I'm going to stop there, Christiana.
Thank you so much, Jo. That was incredible.
No, I'm sorry, it's just a bit.
I've had it for the last 2 weeks, and I think everybody forgives me, so she'll forgive you. You're at work.
It's one of those. It's one of those days, and it just threw me. I apologise to everybody.
Honestly, like we're a really nice group here. We're not fussy, and I've done it to you guys for the last 2 weeks as well, with the people in the background of my office. Right. Well, that was incredible. Let me just take you off spotlight. Sorry, I'm also getting my little bits of information up properly. I'm sorry, you're going to spare with me as well. I'm just going to introduce Ben and Helen, but my information's all gone a bit silly, so I'm just going to be a second as well. Oh, we're going to have to get good with editing skills. Right. It's just opening. I'm so sorry about that, everybody. Right, so I would like to thank Jo and then introduce Helen and Ben. Will you be presenting it in the same segment, or shall I do it separately? Or
yeah, no, we're presenting together.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, so Helen Bendon is an associate professor in film and media and the interim head of the School of Law. and with Ben Serlin, who is a Senior Safeguarding Project Manager in Student and Legal Affairs. Together they lead Changing the Culture, which is a university-wide programme of projects which tackle discrimination, bullying, harassment, intimidation, violence, and any other form of hate. Through collaboration with students, staff, and community groups, we aim to shift attitudes, values, and behaviours to help to build a more inclusive, tolerant, and safer community. Ben and Helen have worked with Barnet Council to tackle violence against women and domestic abuse on this Hear My Voice initiative, highlighting the damaging impact of social media influencer Andrew Tate with school children. So huge thank you for giving up your time to be with us today, and I will pass over.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Joe for setting that up. That's really kind of useful, and it'll be really great if we can maximise on the conversation between us, because I think it's it's really interesting. There's lots of kind of synergies with what we're going to talk about. We're going to focus today on one particular aspect of what we've done, which is called Counter, Don't Cancel. And it is an initiative that we've started working with schools. So we've done a pilot, which we'll unpack a little bit for you and sort of take you through what we did with the kids, how we talked to them, how we worked with the school, and hopefully give you some kind of sort of pointers on what would be useful as parents and carers for you guys to take forward.
Yeah. Just before, oh, sorry, you want to go?
Sorry,
yeah,
go on.
No, I was just about to delve in to say, I mean, we've worked on this for quite a number of years, and I think we're increasingly reading up and learning more about social media in particular, but we're both parents, and I mean, as you're talking, Joe, I was feeling, gosh, increasingly inadequate in terms of my own parenting, so this is incredibly helpful for me, and I'm sure the same for you, Helen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the really, massively valuable things about the series is just to open up those conversations. I mean, I really remember when my kids were small, is in the first year when you're on maternity leave, you're talking about absolutely everything. And this really sort of crucial window that we're talking about now as kind of kids get older and they're navigating social media as teens, we're not talking so much about those things. And this is really, really useful. So just to kind of set the scene, we're hoping that this will, as I say, open up a conversation. If there is something that you don't understand or you want us to repeat, please do ask. This is absolutely a safe space of no silly questions. And also, just a bit of a content warning. Some of the things that obviously we need to unpack with children is about some of the content on social media, which is really difficult. And we will be making reference to some of that content today. So it's just a kind of warning that is part of what we're looking at. We're not using any of this language in any gratuitous way, but obviously some of the actual examples are important to unpack so we understand what our children are experiencing, and some of the language that's in common parlance, which isn't aimed at us as parents. So unless we kind of understand it, we're going to miss it.
Okay, just a quick overview of Changing the Culture, which is a university-wide project that Helen and I have been delivering for quite a number of years now. It responds to what is referred to in the higher education sector as the Changing the Culture framework, which broadly speaking is a set of recommendations and guidance which looks at supporting universities and tackling things like harassment, sexual violence, racism, anti-Semitism, etc. A key part of the work that we do is really trying to empower students to talk about their experiences and using their voices in ways to kind of shift attitudes, values, and behaviours across the university community. And a key part of our work is working with a whole host of partners and stakeholders, both internally, so students and staff, but externally, like local government, NHS providers, charities, specialists, and schools. And really over the last year or so, we've been working with, as part of a Barnet Delivery Board, which helps us hone in on how we support the Barnet strategy for tackling violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. And it's within that backdrop that we've initiated a project called Counter, Don't Cancel, which is how we can work with schools and colleges really to tackle what could be broadly defined as online misogyny. So the catalyst for really kind of taking this forward is Andrew Tate, and very well documented impact on young men and boys in schools. But it's also, as you'll see, it has a much wider brief or reach. So we're not just looking at misogyny, it's things like gender norms, toxic masculinity, subtle yet, I suppose, quite advanced forms of grooming and manipulation. I suppose how fake news works, and kind of challenging a whole host of attitudes that really don't really sit very well with a culture of inclusion, respect, and tolerance. What we're trying to do is, as the name may suggest, is trying to find ways to connect with young people in a way to talk about what's going on, discuss stuff rather than silence the conversation, as a way to kind of increase understanding. And I think a lot of that has a lot of parallels with, you know, being a parent and how you can engage in conversation. So the counter don't cancel approach, what we did, we went into a school, William Ellis, a boys' school in Parliament Hill, and we delivered sessions with Year 8 pupils where we explored different themes around social media, with an emphasis on interrogating messages and developing critical thinking skills. And in a moment, we'll talk about the kind of things that we did in the classes with the students. In the sessions, we brought in a number of Year 11 pupils to support the delivery and act as role models. And that this really ties in with the stuff that Joe was talking about, you know, trying to look at ways that we can counter the influence of social media with positive role models. We're quite aware that as middle-aged university staff, we perhaps don't have the kind of influence that we want with young people, and so looking at where older pupils in the school could provide that. Following the day's session, we returned to the school to speak again to the young people. Really, that was an opportunity for us to further understand their perspectives, but also we wanted to give them a space to further reflect on the day. And again, we brought in the Year 11s to support that conversation. And for both of the days, we came with a small team of Middlesex film students who filmed, documented, captured opinions. They interviewed pupils in small groups and individually, and they also interviewed the pupils. And this has helped us really build a picture of the type of things that are going on, the challenges, the issues, a real rich kind of data set, as opposed to something that's data driven or number driven, if you like. And the students produced a film which we've used internally, but is also used by the school, which I suppose is a great source for kind of trying to implement sustainability momentum about this agenda. So the next, if we go and start off by talking about the type of things that we did, or Helen, do you want to come in there about anything?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess the first thing that I would, the last thing I would say on that last slide is just that there is a bit of fear in schools of trying to get involved in this stuff, because it's pretty horrid. You know, it's like nobody wants to say they've got a problem with misogyny in a school. However, I think there needs to be this sort of openness and willingness to talk about the role of social media and how it's influencing young people in ways, as Ben said, that is not necessarily on the radar of teachers and of parents. So as Ben said, we kind of took this critical thinking approach, which is absolutely core to what we do in university setting, in academia, and brought that down to secondary schools. So we really thought, right, well, how do we think critically about this? So this is just an example. Showed Andrew Tate's tweet that was aimed at Greta Thunberg. And, you know, it was really interesting being in a school environment where you present this. And, you know, a lot of the boys laughed, you know, they thought this is funny. So, you know, we said, OK, so we've registered this. Let's look at what we're doing here. We need to register the message. You know, what is it? Is it positive or negative? Why has the person sent that message? You know, who's it intended for? And we unpacked it in detail and said, yeah, of course, this is kind of a very deliberate provocation. You know, the motive for it is to provoke a response. And okay, when you really sort of unpack it, yes, okay, it's funny, but it's a much older man intimidating a younger woman who's also an activist in a social space. You know, it's kind of flying in the face of climate science. So there's lots of things that actually, when you stop and unpack it and you look beyond the joke, okay, so what is going on there? Is there any evidence to support that this is a fact? Is it just opinion? Is it a joke? Is it perpetrating a different kind of myth? And so there's a huge amount there when you actually open the conversation with young people that we were able to unpack with them.
Yeah, another element that we looked at was the importance of evidence, fact checking, of exploring sources. So we talked to people about fake news, misinformation and propaganda. So we looked at how it's not always obvious, how to spot or distinguish between fact, fiction and opinion, and how seemingly intelligent people can kind of get caught out. We talked about the impact of fake news on us individually and society, and kind of that lack of trust that we see now in major institutions, whether it's the media or the government. And all this paved the way to actually talk about different, a strategic approach, if you like, to fact checking and critically thinking about what you're looking at. And as you see, the infographic on the right unpacks the type of things that we explored with the pupils. I think it's quite obvious when we look at this to see that this is not isolated for young people. This is something that I think all of us really need to look at, how we can develop those skills in ourselves and how we can kind of question what we're seeing, how that can become kind of second nature. It's trying to kind of recognize that no source of news, if you like, is a sacred cow, but at the same time trying to maybe identify what would be trusted sources of information and what wouldn't.
And it goes back to what Joe was saying earlier about you know, teens really wanting bite-sized bits of information. You know, it's obviously there, but then when you receive it as an adult, but especially as a child, when you're in a place of trying to kind of form your own views on the world, it can be a really difficult space for children to navigate. The other thing we really looked at was the pull of social media. Joe talked about some of those reasons why it's a kind of good space, a positive space for kids. But we looked at it with the kids to kind of explore what makes social media such an effective tool for influencing. And so we looked at that from two very specific perspectives. We looked at technology, how the technology works. So we talked to the kids about algorithms. You know, are they good or bad? You know, if you start searching for something and then your feed fills up with that thing, that can be really good. So for example, you know, one of the children said, you know, I'm a Tottenham fan, so actually when I start looking at that content, I get more of that. So I might like then link with other players or other fans, and that's a really nice thing for me to feel part of something. But we also then kind of questioned whether they reinforce some binaries, whether you're inside of something, whether you're outside of that. And so we connected it to this idea of sort of the psychology of it as well. Some of the kids were really surprised to know that apps listen to what you're saying and give you content related to that. So whilst some of the algorithms they saw as absolutely positive, because I want to receive more content about Tottenham Hotspur, for example, they didn't know that it was that there were other ways in which the technology was working. And they were also really surprised to hear that just being a 13-year-old boy without any history of any social media at all means that you will get fed Andrew Tate content. And there's very clear evidence of that. There's some really good journalistic investigation into this by The Guardian, that they set up fake accounts for 13-year-old boys, and without looking at anything, without liking anything, that content of Andrew Tate's was in the feed. So there's a kind of really interesting thing there about kind of being manipulated, which in some ways you like, and in some ways is very negative. And then also there's this idea of the psychology of it. So as Joe said, the kind of pressure to join into something, or the pressure to like something, the pressure to conform, and also take a side. You know, there's a lot of binary thinking. You either like Andrew Tate or you hate him. You either support this team or they're an enemy. You know, it was kind of interesting talking to my son recently about what's happening in Gaza at the moment. And, you know, he was saying there's some sort of binary expressions amongst young boys, because it's like, which side are you on? And it's a really classic example of something that is very difficult to find a right and wrong, or you know, to kind of find a beginning point which then things then kind of form and develop from. So I think that whole idea of the sort of psychology of it, you know, trying to take a side, you know, there's an us against them rhetoric that kind of comes up, and a massive issue is there that kind of comfort of being in an echo chamber. So if you've seen Andrew Tate content, it will keep coming and it will reinforce it and reinforce it.
Yeah, I think as you kind of see, we're looking at different multidisciplinary approaches to psychology, technology, and this idea kind of stems from history. So you might have come across the term cult of personality if you've ever looked at things like dictators like Hitler or Stalin, and it's the idea of how they could acquire a mass of unquestioning followers. So throughout history, there have been leaders who've been viewed as kind of like having superhuman powers, idealized, praised, and without any criticism. And typically it's mass media and propaganda that are driving that forward. So a modern day cult of personality might look a bit different, but it's quite a useful lens to kind of think about kind of how these social media influencers are working. And whilst we didn't specifically unpack history within that, I think there's an element where it could be something that we go back into schools and kind of unpack the parallels a bit more. As you can see, we've got two images on the screen. We've got Marcus Rashford and Andrew Tate, and we worked with the pupils to elicit what were the kind of things that meant that they were popular. So we talked about appearance. I mean, that's not just about being attractive physically, but an attractive lifestyle, and certainly money and having lots of it came up quite a bit. Persona, or playing a persona, so being enigmatic, charming, engaging, and a sense of humor that they related to. The boys, in addition to humor, cited shock tactics, so saying things that are deliberately controversial, which I suppose they all would laugh about and point to. But what's not clear is whether pupils are able to distinguish whether the person, as in this case Andrew Tate, will be telling the truth or not, or whether it's just meant as a way to provoke. And I think we've seen that mimic across social media. We talked about manipulation. I think that relates to the tactics, so masking the facts, misinformation, really speaking or calling to key concerns, things like dog whistling, which really maps to some of the tactics of the far right and radicalization and grooming. But it's so subtle that it's almost happening in front of our eyes. What I think was a key breakthrough for us when talking to the young people was around challenging the binary of good and bad, and right and wrong, with this idea of hero and villains. Essentially trying to say that whilst there might be lots of positive things that Andrew Tate was saying, it doesn't mean that everything he is saying is positive, and vice versa. And similarly the same for Andrew Tate, and kind of getting them to kind of think about the risks of holding somebody on a pedestal. But yeah, it's that.
Yeah, I think you know, we were very conscious not to go in as middle-aged parents and say, you know, he's just awful, you know, you shouldn't like him. That's really not going to work with the kids at all. And so we did present lots of things that he said that was very positive and motivational. But I mean, this is just a kind of example of, you know, in terms of posts that you might see. Okay, so the Tate brothers are doing this fantastic project to provide clean water in I can't read where it is, in Nigeria. And then at the same time, there is this other content which is on the left here, which is incredibly offensive, hideous, and is, how do you navigate that? When you're 13 years old and you're receiving this content, you think, well, actually, this guy is doing some really good things here. And at the same time, and a lot of the school population that we went to were Muslim boys. And to see this is a massive affront to their faith and their family values. And then yet there's this person who seems to be speaking up for young men. So there's a real clash of values here. And so then what do we do with that? Do we just write it off as humour? Do we ignore that? It's actually a really complicated space for young people to navigate. And I think that's really why it's so important that we continue to talk to them. And one of the ways we did it, we didn't actually present this image, but this is kind of really about why we wanted to do that. Is we talked about some of this low level stuff, which is, boys will be boys, it's banter, or rape jokes, or like some of the comments that we've just talked about, which we've seen on social media. When you position it as jokes, it might seem very low level, but what it's doing is normalizing this kind of behavior, which then makes the next level seem okay if we send dick pics or upskirting on the tube or whatever. And so then it's about normalizing these things and how they can escalate into a kind of acceptance of things which are actually criminal, they're assault, they're abuse, and they're really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, obviously, our area is very much around violence against women, and so clearly trying to tackle seemingly low-level stuff and those cultures, rape culture and lad culture, and how they kind of lead to more serious forms is incredibly important. I think another thing that's important for us is, obviously, as a university, we're dealing with over 18s, and a lot of their attitudes and values are very fully formed. And so to try and challenge them in a university setting is really difficult. It clearly needs to happen earlier, if not at secondary schools, at primary schools as well. So as part of our work, it makes sense that we're doing this.
And one of the boys that we interviewed, we said, why do you think Andrew Tate is targeting your group? And he said, because we haven't got a fully formed idea of who we are yet. He actually recognised that. And I think that was really, really interesting in terms of understanding what they're kind of up against at that age, and giving young men the confidence to call out that kind of behaviour, I think is something that schools need to do more on, and we as parents can also kind of support and do more on. So just finally, so we can get on to a bit of a conversation with one another. There's some real crossovers here in terms of what Joe has said, and I think it's incredibly important to keep lines of communication open. And I have just sort of done subheadings here, which is about talking to your children, but making sure that you also really listen. I, as a parent, like the idea that, one of my children come home and say something that they parrot from Andrew Tate would send me into an incredible spin, and I would probably have a reaction to it. And, we were in a situation where, young boys were saying things to us in this session that was really difficult to hear. But it's no good kind of closing it down, because they will double down on their opinions and they'll stop talking. So it's important that we listen and we don't judge, and we open up a conversation. And if something doesn't sound right and isn't right, then this idea of how can we counter that rather than cancel. There's a lot of shame to being cancelled. There's a lot of okay, well, the conversation stops then. It's not an open conversation. That's really not what we want for our children. I would also say preparation for this deep learning day, which I would say was probably one of the toughest gigs of my life. I had to read a lot and look at a lot of content outside of my own echo chamber. And in doing that, I really got a sense of what my children and the boys that we were working with are experiencing. And it's important, I think, that we need to do that and look beyond and read around these things. Joe also mentioned modelling behaviour and sort of saying no to things, but I think it's also
I just want to say it was lovely listening to you as well, from my point of view as an educator, as someone that is a tutor and as a coach as well, because the more I can learn in my role as well, the more help I can be for others. So just like you said, you'd heard things that I said, there was a lot of crossover, which I thought was brilliant, actually. But it's also taught me a lot about, you know, how, I mean, I do a lot of work with children in terms of establishing what their own beliefs and their values and their morals are, obviously. And the younger that I can work with children, the better, because we can establish positive role models in not just in their teachers and with their parents, but as friends and siblings. And actually, one of the things I made a whole list of notes. I'm sure everybody else did, but I've said before about listening without judgment. It's really hard as a parent, isn't it, when you hear something and you have an immediate like whoa moment. It's so important. That active listening is so important. Just listening to what they're saying, and then, you know, digesting that before you make a knee-jerk reaction response, which can then in turn make a child pull away when actually there's a really in-depth, important conversation to be had. And certainly I work with a lot of teens where they are very verbal, very vocal and very outspoken, and it can be very hard to put the poker face on, but I think that's really important. And one of the questions I actually asked some of them was, you know, like you just said there, Helen, you know, who is influencing you? Who do you consider to be people that influence you? And of course it started sort of celebrity down. I use the word celebrity, well-known people out there, and it went down, and I had to like almost peel off the layers of the onion, because to get to the fact that actually your friends might you know, because they could give me the name of, you know, 20 YouTube influencers, but then it was understanding that there are other people that influence you as well. But then I tipped it on, I flipped it over and said to them, who do you think you influence then? And there was like silence. Do you know what I mean? But then as the conversation then opens up, they then realize that they have a role to play in that as well. And I think that's part taking with some responsibility for their own role in being an influencer of in whatever way that is. But yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for all that information. That was really lovely. I'm just so grateful to you for opening my eyes even further to that. So thank you.
I think that question that you asked, you know, who do you influence? What was really good about the school that we worked with is they gave space for the year 11s, the older boys, to you know, we showed them our materials before we went into this deep learning day, and they developed their own, and they ran sessions. So we kind of rotated around. So they spent some time with us, but they also spent some time with the year 11s. And it was really, really interesting. They were able to say things and influence in a way that we didn't. So it's kind of operating at different levels. And, you know, they could close things down in a way that it just wouldn't resonate if we tried to. It was interesting.
Absolutely. And I know what you were saying there about I can't remember the exact phrasing, I don't want to paraphrase, about middle-aged teachers, you know, coming at it from an older age. And I think, you know, I consider myself to be a fairly hip parent, but my children would completely disagree with that, and that's fine. You know, I think it's important to get their views. And yes, my older two are like 20 and 22 now, but they are a very good sounding board for what's happening, and you know, to help us as well, I think. So I think using older ones, or even if we're working with primary age, secondary age, you know, working with primary and so forth, I think that's a really good way forward. Because like you said, Ben, you know, it's catching the low level stuff, isn't it? Because low level is okay if it, well, it's not okay, but it's easily more easily manageable if it stays low level. It's when it escalates after that you've got a problem.
I'm going to thank our 3 unbelievable speakers and stop recording, and then we will open discussion. Thank you, everybody.